It'll be commencing shortly. For now, we'd like to give you a rundown on how to participate in this session. If you lose your internet connection or have to restart your computer, you can rejoin the session using the URL that was sent to you in your registration email. To have a smooth experience while tuning in, we recommend using Google Chrome if you're using an internet browser. If at any point you feel that the presentation is too quiet, try one of the following tips to resolve the issue. Each webinar is aimed to take questions from you, our audience. So let's take a look at how you can interact with our presenters. If you have a question you want to bring into the discussion, you can type it out in the questions panel. When you're ready, hit send and we'll be notified of your question. Once we receive your question, we'll do our best to integrate it into the conversation. Just note that though we do our best to hear from each of you, it may be a busy discussion and we won't be able to get to everyone's questions. The Sikh Research Institute's mission is to provide educational resources to Sikhs to lead a guru-inspired life. As a global non-for-profit organization, we produce original online courses, research papers, videos, podcasts, events, and books to create the richest source of Sikh knowledge online. We hope you enjoyed this session, and if you would like to watch it again, or would like to show a friend the webinar, most of our sessions are recorded and put up on our YouTube channel.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Vaisakhi, Reviving Panthic Leadership. This webinar will begin with a moderated discussion between our panelists, after which we'll have time for Q&A from the audience. So please drop your questions in the chat box and be sure to include your name and your city. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists today. We have Harinder Singh, who is a thinker, author, and educator. He's the co-founder and innovation director at the Sikh Research Institute. A fun fact that I recently learned is that Harinder Singh looks for culturally specific things to experience, along with a light roast pour over coffee. Same with me, to sip during travels. He reads and binge watches to stay in touch with what the world is up to. He currently resides in the United States with his family. And then we also have Ramandeep Gaur. Ramandeep Gaur practices corporate law in the Toronto office of Stegman Elliott LLP with a focus on corporate finance and corporate governance. She also serves on the board of directors at the Sikh Research Institute and currently resides in Toronto, Canada with her husband and 3 children. I'll pass it over to our panelists now.
Great, thank you very much, Vaninder and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to all of you from Harinder Singh and myself. It's nice to be here again. For some of you who joined us last year, you'll know that this is a bit of an annual tradition for Harinder and myself, and it's a nice way to have the opportunity not only to celebrate and reminisce, but also to reflect on what's happened in the years past. So before I get into the topic of our discussion, just a few additional housekeeping items. We're going to have roughly 2 parts to our session today. I will watch the Q&A panel, so if you do have questions, please feel free to post them at any time, although we do have 2 distinct parts and we will pause for Q&A on both of those sections. They both relate to having an introspective discussion focused around Vaisakhi, but also we will be relating the concepts of Sikh leadership and Sikh leadership principles to the present day and a number of current events and current issues that we are seeing and that we are dealing with as well. And so with that, again, I want to welcome all of you. Vaisakhi is always a great opportunity for us, of course, first and foremost, to celebrate and to be thankful for all that we have been given as being the recipients and the benefactors of this wonderful Panth and this wonderful Panthic ideology. But as Sikhs and as lifelong learners, it is also incumbent upon us to constantly be retrospective and introspective, to think about what we are doing and what our predecessors intended for us, and how we continue to try to walk on that path, always looking for self-improvement and improvement of the Panth, and of course, indeed, Chardi Kala of the entire world. So with that, Harinder, why don't we get into the topic of the discussion for today?
Okay, Gurfate Raman, nice to chat with you again in our annual sort of a ritual now.
Yes, it's a good annual ritual. Although I was looking at our profile pictures and maybe we need to update them. So with that, time keeps ticking. So why don't we start into our first topic? So Vaisakhi is obviously inextricably linked with Dasam Pitaji Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. And for as long as I can remember, there have been those that have, struck up this debate. And Punjabi Academy gal shared nahi hundi hai, right? We are sometimes always going in circles having this discussion, or at least from some facets, we have this argument that Guru Gobind Singh Ji took a slightly different path, created a bit of a diversion, that the principles laid down in Vaisakhi 99 and the Sikhi of Guru Gobind Singh Ji being more martial in spirit and with the outward Bana, etc., was a different and went in a different direction from the previous 9 gurus. So why don't we start there? And one of the reasons why we thought it's a good place to start is it's not just a historical debate, but we continue to see the manifestation of those diversions today. We continue to see how that type of thinking has laid root and continues to manifest in various diasporic and Punjab issues. So why don't we start with that? So Harinder, was Guru Gobind Singh Ji's concept of Khalsa different? Was it a diversion? Was it an intentional diversion? So why don't we start there?
Sure. I think at the onset, I want to say 2 things. First is, it is more of a debate in last 50 years. And as I understand this debate, why it is getting more amplified now is because a lot of our understanding of Sikhi is based on writers who are not of the Sikh background, and they're studying the Sikhs. So it is not an indigenous narrative. It is not a native narrative. It is not a Sikhi narrative, but those who are studying Sikhi. So I can recall when I was a teenager, and when my mama gave me books to read, they were all in English, and they were written by, they might be good authors, they might be good scholars, but they are the ones who came up with these things, whether it was the Bengali writers or the Western writers. They created sort of this vocabulary, which started saying what you're calling diversion is a current way to say it, but they used to say things like, there was a change in the mission, like Guru Gobind Singh changed certain things. Well, and they will even use words like transformation hogi si between the gurus. Well, that's not a Sikh narrative. So if we look at Sikh narrative, and it's okay, sometimes you have to go back to the basics. The most basic Sikh narrative is in Guru Granth Sahib. In Guru Granth Sahib, it is very, very clear that the light, the jyot of all the gurus, and the jugat, the methodology of all the gurus was exactly the same, only the body changed. And when we look at our secondary texts, whether it is the Pai Gurdases of the world, or it is the Pai Nandlals, which are the contemporaries of the gurus, or even in last 50 to 70 years, the Sikh writers who are relying on Sikh writings, they do not have this confusion. So what we need to amplify is the basic idea of what guruship is in Sikhi from Guru Granth Sahib and from the Sikh writings, and also what we carry in our Sikh psyche, and not necessarily rely on the current or the last 50 to 70 years of non-Sikh scholarship.
So let's pick up on that thread for a little bit, just focusing on kind of what the concept of Sikh leadership was intended to be. And, when we look at Guru Gobind Singh Ji, we know Ape Gur Chela, right? There was a very different concept of the teacher and the disciple all at the same time. And so why don't we get into that? So, what kind of leadership principles were laid down by the gurus, and but let's distill them in today's days and in today's words, right? We all read books about Western leadership and concepts of Western success when it comes to whether it's corporate leadership or governance or whatnot. What were the Sikh principles? What is the concept of Sikh leadership?
Yeah, so let's start with the very first phrase you said, Gurchela. And what we need to realize is Gurchela started right from Guru Nanak. It is so clear that Guru Nanak passed on the leadership to Pai Lehna and made him Guru Angad and then bowed to him. This is our Psyche records this, our history records this. So Ape Gurchela has been in practice from Guru Nanak, and you will see this, that Ape Gurchela was institutionalized and democratized, if you want to use today's vocabulary, because it went from 1 to 5 at the time of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj. Because what we have to understand is that you have, and we do this too, when somebody comes to, like somebody may come to your firm and you will have them a period of apprenticeship. Then there is a growth which comes. Eventually they are in the decision-making capacity, right? We see this in the Guru period. Guru Nanak, the narrative of Vaisakhi, which is how we look at leadership angles as well now, started with Guru Nanak Sahib. And he says the real purpose in Vaisakhi for us is to get our consciousness, in our consciousness needs to be the Shabad, the wisdom. So when he says Vaisakhi Prabhupave, at the end of the day, whether it is an average Sikh or a representative Sikh in a leadership position, we all exist and we are all reminded to bring Shabad in our surat. And we need to get our mindset to accept this. And we do all this, Prabhupave, to have a relationship with the divine, to have a relationship with the Kuvankar. And then this training happened till the 5th Guru period. I continued for another 5 generations. And then after 5 generations of training, Guru Arjan Sahib used the word Vaisakhi again. And he says, Vaisakhi becomes beautiful. Jasant peta harsoe. When we are ready to submit, to surrender, to adore, to offer ourselves, not just our consciousness, but everything we have developed through that consciousness of Shabad, when we offer ourselves to one who exemplifies the truth, the one who is her, the one who is the light, the one who eliminates the fear. So this is the training. And then we have 5 more generations of that training. And this is when we end up with the Vaisakhi day of 1699, when Guru Gobind Singh said, now this Jyot, this light, this idea of awareness, the next level of awareness, and this Jugat, this methodology to practice this is being transferred to the collective. So we see this happening from Guru Nanak onward. There is a regular development of individuals being trained, first among equals, like one guruship, and then eventually collective guruship in the 5 and through to the Panth. So I think Ape Gurchela is clear from Guru Nanak onward. In the Shabads in Guru Granth Sahib, it's also clear where it says, I think it's Guru Amar Das Patsha's Shabad. I might be wrong, but it is in Guru Granth Sahib where he says, Sikh Guru Sikh hai ek hai, Guru Upadesh chalaye. That the Guru and the Sikh, the mentor and the protege, in today's language as you asked for it, they become the same as long as the protege is furthering the same mission. When we start our own missions, today we call them cults. Today we call them sectarian groups. They've always been there. They actually started at the time of Guru Nanak and they continued in the Guru period. But the ones who continue the mission of the Guru, the ones who were trained by the Shabad, the ones who submitted only to her, they are the ones who are in the leadership positions and were in the leadership positions in the Sikh community.
So interesting, in a way, in a nutshell, the Panth was being nourished and developed in order to be prepared for 1699 and that transference to the collective. Very, very simple words. Mm-hmm. And so let's focus on the transference to the collective, the 1 to 5. So in a way, the first collective, the embodiment of the first set of collective Sikh leaders were the Panj Pyare. So let's talk about the Panj Pyare. Let's talk about the first 5 that came forward. And in what ways they exemplified those leadership principles that had been nourished and developed for so long in order to be prepared for that transference.
Right. So if we limit ourselves to this idea of Vaisakhi only and leadership ideas of Vaisakhi, And I'll focus on the two I mentioned earlier. One was in their surat needs to be the Shabad, in their consciousness is the wisdom, and they're only submitted to the idea of Har, this idea of Ikonkar, we call it in Sikh vocabulary now. So the five which moved forward, even if we look at it from a very basic angle of data, as we call it today, the data is clear. They all five did that. Unquestionably, they did that. And only one out of five was a Punjabi. They came from various corners of South Asia. Their past was not entertained. Didn't matter what their relationships were earlier or what they believed in earlier. We call this Nash doctrine now, that whatever religious belief was of the past, whatever the profession, regardless of how embarrassing it might be, whatever their lineage was or their family, ajkal ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਖਾਨਦਾਨ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦਾ, those kind of things, none of those were entertained anymore. And that's what we saw in practice when Guru Gobind Singh said, कि now इन्हीं की कृपा के सजे हम हैं. This idea that I am also now going to submit to this, just like Guru Nanak had done to Guru Angad. So this idea of Ape Gurchela in practice, leadership quality at the highest levels have to have Shabad in them. They must only be offering themselves to the highest principles of Har, Sant Ita Har Soe, that idea. And they all exemplified that. And it was fully practiced, but it was not fully accepted by the community at that time either. Some Sikhs got startled with that too. Let's remember that. We know that the Baitar, the Raje, what today we will call the governors and the chief ministers of the state or the premiers, they didn't like it. We know this for a fact. Some said, okay, we'll be okay with it if you do a different one or exclusive one for us. We also know that. We also know many Sikhs who were in the fold, as we call it, who were practitioners, who looked like Sikhs, who talked like Sikhs. They also got scared because it was a revolutionary thing. It was not a change, because the vocabulary in Sikhi is Pragateo Khalsa Parmatam Ki Mauj. Khalsa has been in the making from the time of Guru Nanak, and Guru Gobind Singh inaugurated it, revealed it to the world that this is the archetype. The idea of Gurmukh was practically established as the Khalsa now.
I really like that vocabulary, right? Focusing on the fact that it was revealed, right? It wasn't a transformation or a creation or a development at that time. It was something that was there, again, as we said, being nourished, being developed over the many, many generations before, and then ready to be revealed and handed over, so to speak, to the Panth. But I do want to go back a little bit on this concept we were talking about how, again, there is interpretation. People will interpret as they like and pick and choose as they like. Many people say, I'm an adherent of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's philosophy, and that's about it. But we even see nowadays, from a political perspective, and I'm going to come back to diversity and leadership in just a second, but I don't want to lose this train of thought. In India and elsewhere as well, where you have Sikh leaders and non-Sikh leaders, very popular one heading up one of the most populous countries in the world right now, where there seems to be a very selective picking and choosing of certain elements of Sikhi that are then exemplified to show empathy and support, and how the broader population is in fact, in tune with their Sikh brethren, their Sikh brothers and sisters, but in a very selective way in some ways, right? The sanitized, so to speak, and I know again, I'm talking from a third party's perspective, version of what is acceptable to people when it comes to Sikhi. That the part of Sikhi in Punjabi, they accept and they say, this is, look, we are on the same page as you. So what do we do to be alert to those types of diversions, right? Like the underlying themes behind what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we need to understand this point globally. I know we sometimes zero in on India, and it is accurate to do that because 80% of Sikh population lives in Punjab, and the 19% of the current Sikh population of roughly 30 million lives outside. So while we do this, and we need to know, look, this happened at the time of every guru. Every guru had a system to deal with how state or empire presents not just the ideas or the threats of Sikhi, but also how it deals with average citizens of whoever they are ruling. I mean, citizenry is today's word. Earlier, we will call them whoever was under that domain. under that kings
Mhm.
or under that emperors. Every guru did this. They wrestled with it. They addressed it. They were direct participants in it. They were jailed for it. People were hired to assassinate them. State gave orders to behead them. All of that happened. So Panthic leadership needs to fully understand this, if we are trying to revive it, as we called it today, that what is happening today is not unique. This is what happens. This is why Shabad is so important. This is why when we are drenched in Naam, and today's vocabulary, we can call it this idea of love with capital L. It's
Yeah.
only then we are able to operate. How we deal with appropriations, as we call them today, how we deal with skewed ideas of representative leaderships, and how do we deal with state undermining Sikh sovereignty. Every state is doing it. It's not just India. We are struggling in every country in the world. And the reason we struggle with every country in the world is because there comes a point where our personal successes eventually are seen as collective successes. And if those collective successes are getting transferred into some political powers, political capturing of a power, whether it is in terms of MPs or MLAs or MPPs or other forms, there are economic leaderships, then those things do get challenged. And then every government, every state will try to figure out how to create a more control mechanism there. This is where individual Sikhs need to become much more vigilant, and Panthic leadership needs to fully understand this. Instead of denouncing people, figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah. So, I like the fact that you focused on that, which is we tend to sometimes get fixated by the fact that we are dealing with a dearth of leadership, or we have so many issues around us in terms of diversions and dealing with whatever kind of political overlay we happen to be living in, whether it's a diaspora or otherwise. But I think it's a really important point to look at the challenges that were continuing to be faced even by the gurus during the Guru period, and then in the periods following Guru Gobind Singh Ji as well, where we have really excellent examples of Sikh leadership in our history, who faced probably similar, if not in some ways maybe even more challenging circumstances than anything we might see, given the resources that are available to us. So I think it's a really good point to underscore as well. We sometimes tend to get very dejected at our own selves. We like to be very critical, which is important, but almost to the point where we are losing kind of all hope, right? So as long as I can remember, we've complained about our leaders, right? Like if I could quote one thing that my dad has probably said more than anything else, it's like, "Saadi leadership bahut wadiya, assi leadership te pakhon hamesha maar kha jande." So, and we've been talking about this from pre-47 era through to what happened with partition and independence, the leadership of the 80s and 90s, and I'm going to come to it right now, so let's not get into it. But today, what we're facing in Punjab, in India, and otherwise as well. So why this common strain throughout our history? Like, what is it? Is it something unique to us? Is it something unique to the Panth and who we're trying to be, as to why we have this common, I would say, constant struggle with trying to bring about the best leadership that we possibly can have?
Yeah, it actually is a common struggle, but we used to focus on the ones who were working to resolve that. Now we focus way too much on the ones who are adding to that struggle. So, for example, the best time to look at these things in the post-Guru period, because Gurus are perfect. When Guru existed, Sikhs listened to it, but as a reminder, most Sikhs still didn't listen. Most Sikhs still didn't join the Gurus when push came to shove. We know that. That's so clear. We've been commemorating, everyone's been commemorating their own way. We just finished 400-year anniversary of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib. मैं कितने होर भी गल कर रहा सी मैं क्या दिल्ली ਵਿੱਚ when he was beheaded, Guru Tegh Bahadur Pasha, it was a public beheading. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
ये पूरी दिल्ली सहम गई सी, सारे सिख भी सहम गए सी. There was so much fear. So we must understand this happens, but there is a courage. But in our narratives, we don't talk about that everyone became so filled with fear. We talk about how Jatta Singh still did what he needed to do. We talk about how Lakhi Shah Banjara still did what he needed to do. So our narrative is filled with struggle. A khanyo tikhi te walo nikki is to be interpreted like that. that it is sharper than the double-edged sword and narrower than a strand of a hair. That's, it's metaphorical. That the path of the key is like that. We all aspire to walk on that path. We will continue to have this struggle. In 18th century, people who struggled with this, they still figured out how to survive, how to still create a survival for a community after surviving multiple genocides, not just Vadda and Chota Ka Lukara. There were, at least 20 declarations by the state starting in the early 1700s. Not only did we survive, we thrived. We were focused on Shabad, and we were focused on Panthic leadership being so clear, not getting caught up in noise, we'll call it. I'm sure at the time, whether it was Nawab Kapoor Singh or whether it was Jassa Singh Ahluwalia or Jassa Singh Ramgarhia and many others, they, I'm sure, heard all sorts of things too. They were told, tera paath bhi theek nahi. I mean, I'm picking on that Jassa Singh Ahluwalia because we get into these debates even today. When we are operating in a leadership level, Panthic leadership level, theological things were kept aside, and then that's what Sikhs did in back then. They were so focused. The Panthic leadership did not get caught up in the noise, and they went to solve things. They even went to capture Lahore in 1765. So I would say this common strand will continue. Now it is getting more accentuated. Let me just connect it to today. Post 47, we see it more. Post Maharaja Ranjit Singh period, we see it more. Because what has happened is our measurement of Panthic leadership's revival, they keep getting grade. We'll call it grade because earlier, the fights used to be very much head on. You had empires, you had battles, you win the battles, you declare things from Akal Tak Sahib. Well, in last 200 years, the battle scene has changed. In last 70 years, it has really, really changed. The leadership at our control and command center has been manipulated by Punjab's political parties, the Sikh political parties, the Indian state, and now diaspora is playing a role in it through its own ways, right? So it is tough. Let's start there because Gurbani says it's tough. But Panthic leader is the one who still figures out how to navigate this, and he or she does it without giving equal weight to all noises. It needs to give weight to what? What is Shabad guiding me to do? And how am I submitted only to the idea of Ek Oankar?
So picking up on that thread then, in a way, while the circumstances were analogous, we're saying there was constantly in this environment of struggle and this environment where there was threats to Sikhi and threats to Sikh leadership, our predecessor leaders found a way to survive and to continue, gaining their inspiration and constantly going back to the same source, kind of focusing on, like you said, your Shabad is the starting point, the wisdom, the consciousness of the wisdom, the starting point. So is it more difficult for us today than being so spread out, being so diverse? So we often say in this day and age, we have access to social media. We have access to more knowledge than, any generation that's ever preceded us. But in a way, I guess it also means we are maybe, left of this hub and spoke model. We're further away from the hub than maybe we've ever been before.
Yeah, there is that, but then access is better too. If you are removed, like we are saying, world is getting smaller. What do we mean by that when we say that? Which means that access to information and access to figuring out how things are getting done is getting better and better and better. We might not get the transparencies we are looking for from the ones who are making the decisions, but we definitely know how they're getting made, who is involved with them more and more. It is getting relatively easier to critique, for example, and to learn. But let me bring a practical example because I get told that, sometimes you're too much in the past. Well, one of the reasons I like to go in the past and too much in the past is because that's where we get our inspiration from, because they figured out how to solve. But when we talk too much about the current, people get too worked up because it's a current politics. So maybe I'll find something 50 years removed, not, So let me pick on Sardar Kapoor Singh. I think here is a man who at his time is getting trained in the best institutions the world had availed in a Western sense because he goes to England. He's a Cambridge man. So he's got the worldly knowledge. Then he's also a civil servant from the British as well as for the Indian government, because the India was getting independence in 47, so-called, right? So he's also a civil servant who sees how the governments operate. At the same time, he's also seeing how the Akali leadership, which at the time was much more Panthic leadership, is not working the way it's supposed to be working. So he critiques them, but he works with them. He goes to their conferences. He even drafts the Anandpur Sahib resolution. He meets Jarnail Singh Pindranwala. He meets many other people. The point is, here is an individual who knew very much that I am not the Akal Takht Jathedar person, but I am very much in a position and a privilege to keep these checks because that's all I can offer. I think this is where we are lacking many things now. Everyone who gets involved, either they think they need to become the Jathedar or the leader of whatever this movement it might be, or the situation, or the Sarbat Khalsa, whatever it might be. They actually don't see their role. How do you keep your own leadership in check? How do you still contribute to making the changes? How everyone who works for any government is not an agent of the government, but this is the kind of knowledges they have brought in to see how the changes are brought in. He also became an MP. He served in the Rajya Sabha. He gave his speech of the lifetime called Betrayal of the Sikhs, speaking to the power in their own House of Parliament in Indian Parliament. That's what he did. So I think he's a great example to understand knowing your limitations, knowing your role, and then working through the system which is muddy, which is corrupt, but you're trying to make a change. And I think his journey also tells us that if between, let's call it 30s and 80s, he passed away in 86, if this is what the level of leadership was, with the biggest brain of the world we have had, Sikh world, who eventually believed that Naam is what inspires Sikhs, all this tells us we are in a worse situation now in that category. We're in another good situation, but in this category, that those who can be part of these leaderships, they really need to understand the ground reality. And in that ground reality, we need to develop many more competencies. We need to know our own flaws. We need to also understand what kind of fraud is occurring. All this, we will be much, much better if we follow the ideas of Shabad. And Sardar Kapoor Singh exemplifies that for us.
And I'm just going to do a quick time check. So we're going to pivot in a little bit to our second related topic. But if anyone who has joined us today, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. Just a reminder to identify your name and city when you do post your question. And now going back to that thread. So interestingly, nowadays, and maybe again, this is not just a nowadays issue, but when you see promising Sikh leadership, when you see a spark of somebody emerge, whether in the diaspora or elsewhere, we have this tendency that, I think I like what you said, it's either you're a Jathedar or you're head of a Jathebandi, or in Canada, people say, why don't you become an MP? Like we have these categories where we think people should go if they have some leadership capability. And again, it could be in whatever shape or form, whether someone looks like they're a good emerging Panthic leader or a scholar or a thinker or a good business leader or whatever they happen to be. We all come and say, okay, you know what, tenu fulani cheez barni chahiye, or we sometimes inadvertently push people into roles, or I say onto pedestals that they never want to be on and they never asked to be on, ultimately setting ourselves up for disappointment. Let's talk a little bit about that, about the different types of leaders, the different roles, the different places where we need to see, or we should encourage Sikh leadership to emerge.
Yeah. So the encouragement needs to be in all walks of life. That idea is very simple. Today's walks of life are what? Look, today we have more cultural creators than ever before. This is where the world is. Today, the technology is driving the biggest conversation. Just look at last week, the whole Elon Musk and Twitter conversation going on, right? So the socioeconomics and politics are completely coming together. So this is how they used to be earlier. They got little bit, we will call it dismantled, but they are coming back again. This is a cyclical trend. And this is where Sikh world needs to understand that human rights, even in case of Ukraine, and when the China is dealing with it, even when India, we are dealing with it, third year in a row, an agency in US, an independent agency, has says country of particular concern for India. It is in the countries like North Korea, right? And then we are expecting that the Sikh leadership and the Indian leadership and the Punjab's leadership will be able to figure out a solution. No, because everything is driven by economics. This is the reality we live in. So the leadership is needed in every positions. We need people. Look, I'm going to give a very big historical example, which everyone knows. I think this might even shock some people. You know, when Chote Sahibzade di Shahadat hui, who gave the space? Who was speaking in the court in Sarhand? They were not Sikhs, but they were Sikhs as well. They were not Khalsas. So this is where the grayness comes in. They spoke up. So this is what allyship means today. We need allyship everywhere. We need people who understand how the money works. We need people who understand how influence works. We need people who understand how culture sort of creation works. And then we also need, which is the most important thing, which is what we are struggling with largely, a Panthic leadership who knows how to work with all those strains. And this is where Panthicness really matters. Whether you agree with Sardar Kapoor Singh or Sant Jarnail Singh Pindranwale, that's a secondary issue. I'm not talking about that. But even they met and talked. And this is the idea, right? The Panthic leadership is not about that somebody is an untouchable. We have created this new class of untouchabilities in the last few years. It doesn't work like that. We are the ones who work with everyone, but we must know the limits of the roles people are in. So Panthic leadership cannot be driven by a party manifesto. But Panthic leadership very much understand that those who are serving in particular parties or particular economic fields or particular entertainment fields, how to best utilize their influence to either safeguard Sikh interest or literally sometimes to save Sikh lives. That's the work which is needed in Panthic leadership. They must not compromise, but they must know that everyone else who exists in other paradigms, that they have their limitations on how to work with them.
Right. And I think that's a really good point, that not everyone has to be everything at the same time. And people have their different spheres, and they can excel in their sphere as long as they are inspired by these concepts of, the Guru's concept of leadership or Guru-inspired living. But we need to understand and elevate and support people for their particular roles in the particular spheres where they have that influence. We do have this tendency. Yeah.
Robert, I forgot to give the example. So our example I was going to give that because we are getting too caught up in that. And so let me give that example. Just because somebody works within the Sikh fold doesn't mean they're working for Sikh interest either. Like, look, who was Gangu? He was a chef for the Guru. And look what he did.
Inner circle, we would say, right? So close.
And then on the other side, look who is giving the real estate for Chote Sahibzada's last saskars. He's a Jain. People don't even, he's putting every money he's got, who otherwise works at the socio-economic level with the state at the time, but he says, here is what I'm going to do. So the Panthic leadership inspired not only Sikhs, but also non-Sikhs who worked with the Gurus, who worked with the Sikhs to deliver either certain rights or for the Sikh community or the community at large, which included non-Sikhs.
So, going down in that direction a little bit more, let's talk about diversity in leadership or lack of diversity in leadership. There's the obvious debates that we've had and we continue to have around gender representation, and at the risk of happy to be criticized on this, but we even see in those glimpses as pockets where we've had women elevate to positions of leadership in the Panth. Again, the lack of Guru-inspired leadership, where it leads us, right? We have just the fact having women there is not going to be the answer. We still need to keep focusing on the fact that we need leaders who are inspired with the right principles. So gender representation is one issue. The other issue we have in Sikh leadership, I think anyways, whether it's diaspora or otherwise, is this extreme homogeneity when it comes to caste representation, which we can't seem to shed, regardless of the fact that we say, and we're so proud of the fact that, the principles were laid down by our gurus were irrespective of any kind of creed, gender, nationality, etc. But there's another leadership angle too, which is in this day and age, does everyone who's a Sikh leader need to look like a Sikh? Do we have a concept that you can only be a Sikh leader if you have certain ideal Sikh principles, both internally and externally? And we've talked about the internal a little bit, but can a Sikh leader be a Sikh leader even though they're still on the journey to being a Sikh themselves?
Yeah, I think those are excellent questions. So look, anyone can be in a leadership position. Question is at which role? We do this at works as well, guys. I mean, I don't know why we are not applying this within the Sikh fold. If you need a best lawyer, we should be looking for the best lawyer, not just because that's the competency. When we are looking for somebody to do Amrit Sanchar, we should be looking for the ones who exemplify that, right? So we cannot apply criterias crisscrossing. We need to be very clear about the criteria. So when we talk about failure in leadership, as you were talking about since 47, we actually are talking about political leadership. Well, if that's the criteria, then we really need to bring people who understand the politics, people who understand legislative affairs, people who understand mediation, right? But what we end up doing is we find the best figureheads of a Jathebandi who otherwise might be very good in understanding their theology or something else, or maybe they're representative of a political party, but that doesn't mean they are the ones who are going to do those negotiations. And this is why we are having failures. So Panthic leadership, this idea of five were people who look like a Sikh and behave like a Sikh. They are Naam and Shabad inspired. In their circle needs to be all competent people, regardless of their religiosity, even sometimes regardless of their religion or irreligion, because you're trying to find the right people to get the job done. I think this is where we have a lot of confusions. We have had people who look like Sikhs. Look, you look at any major quote unquote Panthic Jathebandi, as self identified, most people say, and you look at the pictures even they put out. I mean, they all look the same. You're right. And if they were really the best leaders available, and if they really were best practitioners of Sikhi, why are we where we are in last 70 years then? Which means something is amiss. And the miss is we need to actually bring the right core competencies together. We need to make sure Panthic leadership is not compromising, but is fully understanding of people's positions. And they need to have gender diversity. They all need to have regional diversity. We just talked about Panch Pyare. We are refusing to do that. When we are refusing to do that, people fight for power, the human dimensions come in, the egos kick in. That's how DSGMC was made. That's how Haryana Gurdwara Prabandhan Committee got made. That's how Canadian Coalition of Gurdwaras and OGCs, the two in Toronto, got made. This is happening globally because we actually are not truly representative even internally. How can we demand that externally? So that diversity is not just of gender, it's of regionalism, it is about the caste, it is also about thought. And I want to focus most on that. We never had issues earlier when people believed in different interpretations. Now we fight about that. We want people with different interpretations. That's a personal experience too. We need to bring those interpretations for the delivery for the community or the community at large, whichever country we might be living in. So in West, we need to work with the disenfranchised communities here. The question then becomes of the Panthic leadership, which barriers are you breaking? And I'm going to end there. Really, Panthic leadership was about removing barriers, finding the best available answers with the best available resources to deliver that. Currently, we struggle with removing barriers, so we are adding more barriers and making the ideals lesser and lesser.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that. Do we really need to make room for different interpretations? Do we need to encourage in a way? Like, is this not a diversion in and of itself? We have a lot to do right now. We have a lot to focus on. We do at least have some semblance of what a commonality of Sikh interpretation if we focus, purely on the interpretation that's largely accepted as kind of under the leadership of the Akal Takht, or we'll say whatever is kind of still linked back to our our ancestors or our forefathers and foremothers from 50 to 60 to 70 years ago, when the Sikh Rat Maryada was codified, probably longer. But in my mind, like if we focusing on different interpretations and communities that have gone off under different interpretations, and either their own sects or their own kind of offshoots of Sikhism, doesn't that dilute us in a way? We have limited energy.
Yes. So what I was saying was that the ones who are making decisions need to be fully understanding of that and need to look. The problem we are facing, and I've been part of some of these where we are trying to find solutions, things get played out on social media, committees actually never get made to do the actual work, and it becomes a political decision at the end of the day. And what I'm referring to is this committee work. Even in the,
Right.
These Western democracies or in corporate houses or in nonprofits or wherever else we might be in the world, there is a system how you develop an answer. And that answer is developed by subject matter experts. They need to understand these interpretations. I'm not saying every interpretation needs to be equally weighed in, but the theological interpretation must not be allowed to challenge the Panthic solutions we are looking for. Unless that solution is, for example, currently there's a debate going on standardization of Guru Granth Sahib's proofing, because that proofing standardization doesn't exist. And this issue comes up every couple of years, and it gets tossed in the media. I have seen it going on for the last 20 years. And then people get, you find somebody, a scapegoat. If somebody challenges the authority, then they became the scapegoat. The actual issue is not that. The actual issue is we know that it's been 100 years that there are issues related to the printing of Guru Granth Sahib's bead. We need to actually do the work. That work needs to be done by people who understand not just the literary knowledges, of the manuscripts, but also are experienced in this. And they are from the diverse, what we'll call subject matter experts from various schools of thought. They need to work together and say to the team of Akal Takht Jathedars and SGPCs and the Panthic organizations, here is what we came up with. We believe this is what needs to happen. And they have to really work together. This is where different interpretations matter. And that should be then presented and through Akal Takht and other spaces be asked to be followed. But what happens is we never do that work, and since we don't do that work, we end up punting, koi agli wari kar lo, is war enu saja de do, is war eda video bana do, is war e kar lo. So this is what we are going through. So when I said varieties need to be understood by the ones who are trying to come up with the solution. And then in that consensus building, you present things to the authoritative bodies for implementation.
Very aspirational.
Well, but this is what it is, right? I mean, I don't know what else we can do. Otherwise, you see constant manipulation. I think it's very basic, but yes, it is very aspirational. It is very basic because we don't do this, and we don't do this, so we keep facing the same issue, and then it looks like nothing ever is happening. Like if I talk to you about from last year when we talked to now, it looked like nothing has happened. No, many things have happened, but here is the biggest thing on our minds now, because this is in the news for last 2 weeks,
Right.
So it's always, look, Vaisakhi has always been, I want to come back to it maybe in the larger macro picture. Vaisakhi has always been about Granth and Panth coming together. It really is. Whether Guru Nanak Sahib did it, or whether Guru Amar Das Patsha called for gathering on Vaisakhi at Goindwal, or Dasame Patsha, it is what is the idea we practice. We now call that Guru Granth Sahib. It is not just an idea. It is not just a book. It is Guru. So we take it to that level. And those who interpret this for the betterment of the community, guess what? A year later, we are still struggling with this because the last time it happened, even it's a different incarnation of, sort of what happened in Punjab in last 7 years. So many commissions said they still did not solve this problem. Because the problem is not getting solved, its varieties of manifestations keep coming out. And it will only be solved when we ourselves are really wrestling with it. I don't think we wrestle with it enough. Then we can celebrate Vaisakhi at the highest levels. Then we can take on some bigger issues. I think people at large are doing it. If you look at last year's successes, you know how Sangat or Sikhs at large show up to support, whether it's the farmers movement, whether it is the ideas of Gurpurabs coming together again. Community is always there. We are serving langars still. We are also serving people at large. We are also very worried about situation in Punjab and situation in India. We are also worried about, if you want to bring in Canada, what has happened with admittance of the Canadian government with the indigenous populations. But the worriness in that second part is not getting transferred to what can we say in somewhat consensual manner. Let's take care of this one or two things this year. That part is not happening because in order for that to get implemented, we need to have people who actually design the work on it day and out, and that's when it can happen.
Yeah. So we have a good audience question that I think links into this conversation at this part. So from Nawab Singh, we have a question that from their point of view, that Sikhs have not really understood the true message of Guru Nanak, and in the absence of that, how do we hope to create true leaders?
I think that's a great question, but I'll take it in spirit because I think there's a bit of a fallacy. We will never fully understand any idea. I mean, look, when we work somewhere, do we fully understand what we are doing? No. When we are even the best lawyers like yourself, Raman, I'm sure you will say, I don't fully understand how can the charter be fully interpreted of Canada, for example, right? We can never fully understand. But what is always clear, if the intent is clear and allegiance is clear, things happen. If somebody at your work questions your intent, your allegiance to your work, you will be fired.
Right.
This is where we are. We will never fully understand the Shabad. We do not have the capacity to fully understand Guru Nanak. He is operating in the Thakadiya Surt Mataman Buddh. I have not even able to sharpen one part of it.
Right.
He is operating in different environment because gurus are perfection. But my intent toward the Guru and my allegiance to the Guru, that must not be questionable. And I think this is where issues are. We do not look for perfect people. We will never find perfect people. We looked for flawed people. And we worked with the flawed people whose intents and whose allegiance was 100% clear.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, is the intent and the allegiance is what should be first and foremost, because otherwise we will continue to look for perfection. Or, like I said earlier, we will continue to elevate people who will then disappoint ourselves because our concept of what a true leader is it's failed it's failed from the beginning. And we often, when we talk in colloquial terms as well, we say, leaders come from the population, right? You only get the leader you deserve, or you only get the leader that you are able to develop. The leaders aren't going to drop in from out of the sky somewhere. They emerge from amongst us. And in a way, I know, especially when we talk about Punjab politics, but I think it's true of the diaspora as well. We tend to separate ourselves a little bit too much in some ways. But really, we are, the leaders are us, and the leaders are only going to be as good as we are, in a sense, when I say the large communal we, right? And so maybe in that sense, then, if we focus on your last comment, we need to focus and ensure that our intent and our allegiance is focused, that we are pointed all in the right direction, regardless of, again, if we have a difference in how we practice or our interpretation or where we are in our journey, because that's when we can really have, a leadership emerge from among us that is also focused when it comes to intent, but not only intent and inspiration, but you said this earlier as well, behavior, right? That's one place where we can all start, which is, in your own sphere, focusing on your own behavior. And is it Guru-centered, and is it Guru-focused, and are you pointing in the right direction?
So let's apply the Khalsa here, right? The historical understanding of Khalsa included both. For example, when Pai Nandlal is writing this, the one who is a court poet of Guru Gobind Singh, he says, Khalsa so jo nirdhan ko pala, the one who takes care of the destitute. But it also says, Khalsa so jo dusht ko gale, the one who takes care of the tyrants. And this is where we are caught up today again. Why are we saying that we don't need to take care of the destitutes? And why are we saying those who take care of the tyrants are not doing the right thing? Well, the Khalsa is a collective. In that collective, we have both. We have many more, but I'm just using those two to make a point. We need to really develop, this is the understanding that, this is part of us. And if I'm not able to do that, let the other person do it, but it is part of who we are. This is part of Khalsa behavior, Khalsa character. This is what Guru Gobind Singh says, Satgur Pura. Khalsa mera Satgur Pura. So Khalsa is vast, like the Shabad is, like the Guru is. Khalsa is not an individual. Khalsa is not a Jathebandi. Khalsa is the embodiment of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj and Guru Nanak Sahib. It's an embodiment of the Shabad who lives that Shabad. In that embodiment, individuals will be imperfect, but in the collective, we must accept that there are going to be seemingly conflicting things, like people say about gurus, they will say about Khalsa as well. But the Khalsa, or those who have aspiration to become like the Khalsa, they must not have those conflicts. We must say कि मेरी ये capability अजय नहीं है. I do not have this, but I support this because this is part of who we are.
So, so going forward from there, is it consistent with the concept of secular democracy or secular Western democracies? Although I think we have this fallacy again that this is a Western concept, to have leaders who are inspired by religious principles. You hear this. This is another common recurring theme. Whether there's a place for people who, and again, I'm not talking about religious leaders in religious spaces, but leaders who are inspired by Sikh principles in political spheres generally.
Look, Western democracy is going through its own demise, and that's being debated politically and philosophically, and now even in social sciences, because we see the reality of democracy like America and democracy like India and a democracy like Pakistan and many other democracies, including Russia, because they are also parts of manipulations are available, how the systems of governance can be manipulated to disenfranchise people from even voting in many cases. So that said, I'll take it in the larger concept of when the gurus were operating, we were dealing with systems of kings and emperors. Okay? Largely, that was the area. So gurus dealt with that in that system. When we had 18th century Sikhs, they're dealing with sub-element of that. They are dealing not as much with emperors directly. Some cases they're invaders. In some cases there are kings who are fighting in the area, but there is a lot of fluidity. So they were also fluid because they did not establish a domain. When we try to understand missiles, this is how we should understand. They're dealing with very fluid idea of a domain. So they were also fluid even within themselves. Okay, we come to Maharaja Ranjit Singh period. Well, the British has an empire, now the Sikhs have an empire. But remember, and I'm answering this in a little bit longish way, but it's important. Even Ranjit Singh, although it was a monarchy, because British Empire, although it had its own Western idea of it, but the monarchies were very common in Asia at the time. He even called it Sarkar-e Khalsa, which means he's trying to be in the vicinity of the Khalsa. Did he misuse that word? Likely, because he did not apply all the Khalsa principles, but we see that happening. Now in the last 100 years, we're seeing democratic systems taking over Sikh institutions, and this is what you're referring to, and also non-Sikh institutions like in Canada, those who are becoming MPs. Look, there is always, regardless of wherever you are in the world, there is always an interaction between religion and politics. We can debate whether there is a separation of church and state, as America likes to say it, and certain French philosophers, but that's not the forum. But there is no denial by anyone. The influencers of religion and politics are always working together. I mean, look at even Putin's Russia. He himself had his family converted to Christianity. This is why the right wing in America does not say anymore godless Russians, because they are not anymore. They actually became Christians, right? So this is always happening. For us, what do we do? Look, our current struggle is that when a Sikh operating in a non-Panthic affair is operating through a particular political party, in India, we have a different measure. And then we have a different standard when they're doing it outside of India. we need to get out of that sort of a dichotomy as well. We need to understand they all pay allegiance to their political parties, and it is a struggle. I mean, this is struggle for every Sikh. This is even a larger struggle, which I don't think is being fully acknowledged by those who are initiated into the Khalsa order, because we have those at the highest levels of leadership. They serve not only in BJP, for example, in India, they serve in Congress, they serve in AAP, they serve in Akalis, and many other parties. Similarly, they serve in NDP, they serve in liberals, and they serve in conservatives. If we look at the collective delivery, can we say anywhere we have had collective delivery for Sikhs? I think our answer will be no. There have been individual successes. So the religious allegiance or religiosity of an individual needs to be utilized for delivering something for Sikh community or delivering something for the community at large. That needs to be the criteria. Whether they are what level of religiosity they are practicing, that should not be discussed. That's an individual matter. But whatever level they're practicing, we should be asking, what are you doing for the larger community out of this? And if they're able to do one or two things in their tenureship, that's a lot. Don't expect too many things. We know it takes years of work to build alliances, to build your influence. And then at some point, whether it's 5 to 10 years, to go deliver one big thing before we can say they didn't do anything.
Yeah, and so particularly speaking for the diaspora, at one point we would say, at least there was representation, right? Representation was the starting point, having the community reflected in the political leadership. And then, of course, as time has gone on, we have more representation and we've checked that box. It's kind of, now, then the focus is like, okay, now we are looking for concrete support of community initiatives. We're looking for how are you there for the community? But I think the next step is the one you're speaking to, which is the ability to actually rise above whatever political, ideological differences there are and work at a collective level, at least for certain initiatives. We can't imagine or expect that for everything, but at least for very certain important Panthic initiatives to rise above those differences and work at a collective level, particularly when there's a lot of commonality amongst some of our younger leaders. I can say that for Canada for sure. And I do see there is an audience question, so I will come to it. We're going to pivot a little bit in terms of our topic, and I think it's going to fit into our second topic. But before we kind of do that segue, Harinder, I think we can't leave this topic without talking about what's happened in Punjab and in India in the last little while. And there's a number of things we could pick on. But I do, a common, something that we've all been talking about and trying to understand the different facets of it. And in a way, a glimpse of hope, or maybe a glimmer of hope, at least from my perspective. We see what have emerged out of the Kisan movement, and then the very quick push to, again, maybe our haste in trying to take something and turn it into something much larger than it was intended to be. There was the push from, there was the trend, I guess, the transference of the leaders from the Kisan movement into political party in Punjab, but also we've seen the extreme rallying, I guess, support around people like Deep Sidhu and other personalities by the younger generation. Almost in a way, you say the younger generation was yearning for a hero, and when they find the hero that they think they have, everyone tends to. There's a lot of bandwagoning that happens. I'm not saying it in a derogatory way. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are, was there, in my mind, and I'm interested in your interpretation of this. You need to have a right set of circumstances, and there was a right set of circumstances coming out of some of the wokeness that was created from the Kisan movement. There was an element of secularism to that allowed people to attach themselves in a much larger way than perhaps if it was just a singular Sikh issue or a focused Sikh issue. And then you see this real, again, extreme exuberance or support, enthusiastic support for the so-called leaders that emerged and then in some ways quickly died down. And I mean that metaphorically more than anything else, because obviously we know there's a tragedy, a personal tragedy involved here as well. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is where the rubber meets the road, as they say, right? Everything we have talked about till now, this is culminating here, and this is a good case study. So what we see successes. What success do we see? That people at large might not fully understand the issue, but their intent and their allegiance was so clear. Let me just apply that here. People at large, it was so clear. We talk about the diversities of people. We talk about building an allyship to understand what really is the project in this movement. And people came together. Diaspora and homeland came together. Rest of India and South Asia came together. Many things happened. The castes came together. Different socioeconomic people came together. Different political ideologies
Women showed
came
up in
together.
ways. The women showed
So
up in ways
that's
like
a
they
huge
haven't
success.
before.
So
Yeah.
that's a huge success. In that success, what we have been discussing also is Panthic leadership's role. That's where the extreme failure is. Extreme failure is because we do not have a concerted Panthic leadership, they were not able to figure out how to utilize this amazing exemplification and display of solidarity for the benefit of the Sikhs and for the benefits of India and diaspora. And that's where the struggle is, because people, that committee thing I was talking about, taking the diversity of opinions, coming up with the plan, fueling the plan with the money, with the people, with the strength, and then getting it accepted. Like one thing, this is not about creating 5 or 10 things. Remember Vaisakhi, look, Sikhs used to have Jod Melas on Vaisakhi too. They used to come up with a single point and at most 2-point plan, which they will finish. We did not come back with a single point plan because we do have, this is why we're saying, how do we revive Panthic leadership? People, Deep Sidhu, Sandeep Singh is a great inspiration. You may agree or disagree with whatever he did, but there is no questioning that he represented a particular stream of consciousness which crossed many boundaries, which spoke to the sovereign element of the Sikhs. This is not about debate on him, and I'm not going to get into that. We must acknowledge this is what Panthic leadership should be doing. We can, in internal reflections, we can say what needs to happen and where. I was there on the day of his Bhog as well, and I saw the crowds. This is about public response. I'm not going to get into everything else which has to do with manipulations also. But that stream of consciousness exists, which I think is a great news. I mean, we've been told youth is not interested, youth is drug infected, youth has cut his hair. Guess what? There is that awakening which is happening and which may not look like whatever you might want from a particular look of a Sikhs, but that consciousness does wonders and it exists. I think that's the best news. The Panthic leadership is where our struggle has been for decades. And this is yet another point. If there is someone, a Jathebandi or a Akal Takht, or people who are interested in creating some sovereign system of the Sikhs to utilize these opportunities, today's vocabulary, these opportunities keep coming. And we don't have a plan. We don't have how to utilize these opportunities for the public benefit, whether it is for the Khalsa systems or whether it is for community at large. So that's what it is. That's how I see the movement. And we had discussions on this. I was involved in the early phase with some of the leaders involved. In the post stage, I was in India last month. I talked to some of the leaders who are anti-establishment. They are pausing because, again, yet another opportunity lost. And we keep losing these opportunities because we are not doing the grunt work. Grunt work is not done by public. People who are planners, people who are going to think about varying thoughts and the realities, especially the ground reality within Punjab, ground reality within India. They have to come up with the plan, and then the public will support, as we have seen in last 1.5 years as well.
So I'm going to pivot and segue, and I think I've been a little late doing that because we got caught up in our discussion, but just into our slightly related kind of second topic, which has to do with, again, we've in a way it's a major success in the diaspora and in India as well, that we have at least come to mark certain Sikh days, significant days in the Sikh calendar. In Canada, we have the month of April as Sikh Heritage Month. I know there are declarations and proclamations from various states, assemblies, all sorts of jurisdictions around the world mark significant Sikh days. And again, opportunity for us to celebrate, opportunity for us to be thankful, opportunity for us to reflect on all the greatness that has come before us. But then, maybe a little bit more. And what I want to connect this to is, what are ways in which we can use these successes and at least this recognition that we have in the diaspora to, again, be as positive and as contributory as possible to the situation. Again, we're talking about India because you're right, 80% of the population is there, and we can't have a conversation around Sikhs and Sikhi and development of Sikh leaders without talking about India. But how do we use these opportunities to actually help the situation on the ground and not become more of a diversion for them as well?
Yeah, so the heritage includes Sikh heritage, right? All of it. We need to be cognizant of that. It includes the elements we may not like personally because I'm not able to do it, or my party or my cohort doesn't like that. So heritage includes all. Our full narrative. Full narrative, if somebody needs to get a summary of it, just read the first 3 paragraphs of Ardas. There is no time bound there. This is our full narrative. It is not everything is clean and sanitized. Some of it is very bloody as well. That's part of our heritage as well, because Dust Ko Gale was part of Khalsa heritage. And we remain like that. Its outer manifestations may change. Second thing we can do is that we need to look at all this, which is a great celebration in a sort of at a cusp of community at large, but we are not entering community at large even now. When I look at the Guru period, when I look at 100 years ago, Vaisakhi, in Guru period, Gurus went to the larger festivals and they did their interpretations and alliance building there. When I look at 100 years ago, we still did this. The person who was breaking barriers 100 years was Baba Sahib Ambedkar. On Vaisakhi Day, he was invited to Amritsar because he was best competent man looking at the South Asian reality, breaking those barriers. And they got so enthused with it, they said, let's set up Khalsa College in Bombay, and they did the fundraising and bought the space. We need to be doing this. In our celebrations, there needs to be that project, even if it's only one project, to figure out who is breaking these barriers today, either in your locale or in the larger community, including in India, and let's support them with tan, man, and tan. So this project building is very, very important. Otherwise, it will be left only to festivity. And I understand festivity. We all love selfies and we like to show that who came to this event, and it shows influence, perhaps. But look, unless there is a delivery for strengthening of the Khalsa or rights for the community at large, this leadership, this celebration is reduced to a merely annual ritual.
So I'm going to go pivot to the audience question now and maybe interpret it slightly in my own way to relate it to our conversation as well. So this comes from Kirpal Singh in Daytona Beach, Florida. And I think the gist of their question is around maybe the lack of the ability of the Akal Takht to fully embrace the needs and I guess to be reflective and embrace the needs of the broader diaspora. So kind of focus maybe a little too narrowly on what's happening in Punjab, or in terms of, the question relates to the Akal Takht's inability to, or I shouldn't say Akal Takht, our SGPC and our leadership's inability to fully understand what is diversity in leadership and what diversity is all about. And therefore, the gist of the question is around whether hukamnamas should apply to the diaspora. But I'm going to twist this up slightly and to say, do we suffer from a real lack of the ability of our central leadership to really fully understand the needs, but also the motivations of the broader diaspora? And is that an issue? Should we even be looking to central leadership to do that?
I think the answer has been clear for decades. We shouldn't be looking, but they need to be part of our awareness. We know it is not effective. We know the stands there change based on the political parties' alliances, Akali parties' alliances. So, the answer is Akal Takht as an institution is a Sikh institution, and we remain aligned to it and we will listen to it. But at the same time, let's apply 100 years ago. Practicality is when it was run by the British Stooges, Sikhs were very aware of it, that even when they did their photo ops and when they did their saropas, Sikhs were aware that why this is happening, and they just let it go until they recaptured it. Today, the question which came, and I'm going to take that question, what can we do in our locales? Well, this is what you can do. In your organization, in your Sangat, are you reviving Panthic endeavors? The levels of Panthic leadership models? Because if we are also not doing it and we keep blaming them who are wrestling with much more powers to be, we get a little bit of a power in our Gurdwara and organization, we don't let go. I mean, white beards like me keep running the same organizations for decades. So where is our model of Gurchela? In our households, in our organizations, here in diaspora and in homeland. Remove yourself from SGPC and DSGMC and political parties for a second. Rest of them can do it. I don't see that in Panthic Jathebandis. I don't see this in nonprofits. I mean, it's a serious problem, which means let's not a scapegoat where the game and the money is bigger than the Game of Thrones, and that was fictional. The game within our own organizations is also very much the same, and we need to change things there. Because if enough of the organizations and nonprofits and Jathebandis actually revived the Panthic model leadership within themselves, then when the opportunity comes next, maybe we'll be able to change it and provide the right committees so the Jathedars and the SGPCs are able to possibly make the right decision.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a little bit. I mean, I see that as one of the more acute potential, I guess maybe crisis is a big word, but real challenges coming up is that we have in the diaspora done quite well over the last 30 to 40 years, but really not focused on succession and leadership. And to your point, yes, the white beards have been running the same gurdwaras, and when they don't like the gurdwara, they've just built another one. And I don't know if there is on the next level of Sikh leadership to fill the void. In some pockets there are. In the US, for example, and to an extent in Canada and other countries, we've seen post 9/11 the emergence of great Sikh organizations that are focused in their own spheres, maybe an alternative to what was previously the only option for a place to go for community building and community gathering, which was the Gurdwara. We know the Gurdwaras can't be everything to everyone, and they shouldn't be, and we need these other organizations. But we still need someone as a succession plan for the Gurdwaras as well. We can't abandon them either. And I have this debate with young people quite often. And in fact, we are facing the situation where I'm in Toronto, where Gurdwara committees are, on one hand, begging for young people to come in because they, frankly, are probably ready to retire, move to Florida and, bask in the sun. But on the other hand, you have young people saying, well, that's, I've seen how tough that is. I know what that involves. That's not for me. I'll volunteer with this organization. We have food banks, we have international aid organizations. We have all sorts of wonderful things happening, but we have nobody who seems to want to be stepping into this succession plan.
So Raman, I mean, this is something which is, again, the writing is on the wall. And the writing is so clearly on the wall. Let's apply the Guru model. Well, they all developed it. Are we developing it? Are we allowing it? And this is not about just developing leadership. I think we might be doing that, but we're talking about Panthic leadership. So in our first generation and second generation organizations, are we really developing Panthic leadership? Are they ready to negotiate? Forget India for a second and Punjab for a second, as some have suggested, including yourself. Are we able to do that in Toronto? Are we able to do that in Canada, in America, wherever we might be existing? Panthic leadership has the same model again, which means knowing Shabad-based inspirations. Sure, now there are organizations, and I think Sikh Research Institute and myself, I'm part of this. We may be building governances. We may be building funding mechanisms. We may be, 2xing and 5xing the number of people who work for us. But are we also developing a Panthic leadership? I think the answer is going to be, at best, maybe, most likely, no. So our work is cut out. Just like the previous question, this one applies to us as much. Let's do it in our organizations. There will be imperfections, but can we take our model of single man running these organizations to preparing, 5 to run it. You know,
Yeah.
again, we are not gurus. We can never be gurus, but we take the modeling from the gurus. So ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ if one person cannot do it, then develop 5 to do it, develop 10 to do it. And that's the idea. And I think our work is cut out. We struggle with it because we have not created those spaces. It is part, and I don't even want to say it's hard because everything is hard. We talked about it. This is what the Khalsa ideals are. If we keep saying it's hard, we are not working hard enough or smart enough to take care of it. Maybe we are still not love drenched. ਨਾਮ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਨਸ਼ੀਅਸਨੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਅਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਔਖੇ ਕੰਮ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰਨੇ ਸੀ ਪੰਥਿਕ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਿਵੈਲਪ ਕਰਨੀ ਸੀ ਬਾਕੀ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਤਾਂ ਬਣ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ we are seeing that very clearly. Sikhs are punching above their weight in every field. If you go by the representative politics, apply that representation to other spheres of life, we are making great leaps, giant leaps, actually. Showing up in every space of life. We are ready for even Grammys now, right? So it's in entertainment, it's in colleges, universities, it's in IT sector worlds, it's in medicines. But organizations which started even 50 years ago are at a cusp of, when their founders are leaving or dying, of folding, because we actually are not developing not only leadership, we are not paying attention to developing Panthic leadership there. So we can have the best doctors and the best doctor organizations, lawyers and the best lawyer organizations, but are they Panthic? And how to make them more Panthic needs to become the mandate of all these organizations.
We have a audience comment that I think is something that I know resonates with you, and you've commented on a lot. And Navab Singh from Georgetown has said, we need to create formalized leadership capsules for young budding leaders for the future in North America. But I would say the future of the Sikh Panth everywhere, in Punjab, in India, in the diaspora, no matter where the diaspora is. And I know this is something that you've commented on in the past, is, almost like a leadership academy, right? Like where we a place where we can at least have a formalized way to think about, again, creating those types of leaders that are guru-centered and guru-inspired and have the opportunity to flourish.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are doing experiments, and other organizations do that too. Our program is called SIDAK, but it only covers the idea level, not the practical levels, right? And those practical levels, we need much more. Look, people ask me, how come Sikh leadership is not getting developed? But where are they getting trained? Like, for example, State Department runs a program in America where they invite leaders from each country and states, including in India, like regionals, provinces, states. But since we don't have country or a state, we can never enter those to get trained into how the world is operating. We can never have accesses to where people are influencing decisions. So our work is really cut out. We need to operate more and as a Commonwealth, Sikh Commonwealth idea. And yes, one of the works is to develop understanding how the world works, how to create influence and work with influencers, that kind of training as well. There are many trainings needed. If we really had independent Akal Takht, they would be running that. That's how it used to happen. If we don't have it, here is one project. Yeah, you can help us build that, or someone who has philanthropist interest should seriously think about developing what we call political leaders or civil leaders who will work for the Sikhs.
Yeah, and I think if we simplify it, I mean, it's a great idea, and we have all sorts of great projects that have taken fruition over the last 10, 20 years. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that we will have enough focus from the Panth and support to be able to get there. But on a very simple level, I'm asking the audience, and we've got some good questions here. If you're a community leader, if you have the opportunity to have worked in a community organization, we say this in popular, the kind of management learning circles, that great leaders, the job of great leader is to create the next great leader that comes behind them. So maybe you can inspire someone, maybe you can mentor someone, maybe there's somebody in your circle that you see that has this spark that you can create an opportunity for and create a space for as well. I think if we all just found one person and said, we're going to foster this one person as our own personal legacy, that would be a great improvement over what we have today. In a way, I feel like, I apologize because I'm really just focusing on what is my own experience, which is the Sikh diaspora in Canada second generation immigrant child. It's almost like the leadership of our time was created almost by accident, organically. There wasn't a design, and we're fortunate for where we've come. But I think your point and the point that we've been discussing is we need to have a design. We can't just let things happen the way they're going to happen. We need to have a focus and an intent, and again, put our resources and our support in that direction, because it's we're ready for that. Going back to where we started our conversation around Guru Gobind Singh Ji and Vaisakhi 1699, and how the Sikh Panth was nourished and developed over the period of the first 9 gurus until we were at the point that the revelation was possible. We were at the point of maturity where the Panch Pyare would come forward and we would have a transference to the collective. We've been incubating for a really long time now, and maybe need to start focusing on when that incubation point can go to a more formalized perspective when it comes to building Sikh leadership within the diaspora and within Punjab as well.
Yeah, and I would actually say, I think, yes, that's true, but at the same time, the design has always been there. In the house of Guru Nanak Sahib, the design was always Shabad.
Yeah.
And if the Shabad is missing in the training, then it's a flawed design, or it's a design for some other end. It is not going to get us the Panthic leadership. And that's sort of a running thread we see in our history for 553 years now. We had people came in leadership positions and we didn't like them because they were not as inspired by Shabad. We all had moments, like many Masans were great, but many became corrupt because Shabad inspiration died. And sort of where we are today. Many end up in good places because they were inspired by some value of Sikhi, and we talk about it. But at some point, something else superseded that. And the Panthic leadership, it can never supersede that. That's the difference.
I think that's a great idea for us to kind of focus on for the last couple of minutes we have left. We do find there are glimpses, there's periods in I'm talking about the recent history where there seems to be a renaissance or a return to focus on Shabad. And then because of what's happening in the political diaspora, or otherwise, whatever kind of dialogue is popular, people really focusing on separation of church and state, or focusing on, this idea of, you hear a lot of people say, well, I'm spiritual. I believe in spirituality. I believe in being a good person, but I'm not a religious person. Or, I'm not going to say I have any particular allegiance or affinity to a religious philosophy, but I'm a spiritual person. We see that even in Sikh circles a lot. We see that discussion coming up now. But I think that's a really good way to kind of focus us for the last couple of minutes, which on really going back to the essence, which is Shabad, and the design that has always been there, and the way in which we've said this, we were taught this, the universality of it, but then we tend to forget what that truly means, and how that means it does permeate every walk of life, and it's not a dichotomy, right? It's not a inconsistency to say I'm going to live according to these principles, which are my religious principles, and I'm using the word religious loosely there, my Panthic principles, the design that was laid down by Guru Nanak, and that is not inconsistent with living in a secular world, or a world where people seem to be less comfortable with that, very public allegiance to a religious philosophy.
Look, from Guru Nanak onward, his reality was just like our reality. He was also dealing with job issues, money issues, political right issues, jail issues, sexuality issues, family issues. I mean, how is that any different than us? And that's what he was dealing with. And in there, he proposed for himself and those who wanted it a model of Kartarpur, which was inspired by creating a reality in that muddy sort of complexities of life. It was open to all. His own 2 kids did not accept it. So we need to understand that models. This is how it started. So when somebody says today, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, Panthic leader needs to understand that mindset. That doesn't mean we put them down, but we also not allow all noises to stop us from our mission. You see, this is where our sphere comes in, our sphere of awareness. It needs to be very, very large. That's what Gurus taught us. It needs to include all the conflictions of life. But what I do with that, what actually on goes from our awareness to our consciousness, ਸਾਡੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਚੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸੁਰਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਜਾਣਾ, ਉਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਆ. And that shabad drives what solution am I offering? How am I going to connect myself with the Koankar, with the divine, with the one? And out of that connection, that source of strength, what change, what barrier I will be breaking to create a better egalitarian society. It's okay for people to feel whatever they are feeling. We are not the policemen of the world. We never were. Because I am not as connected with the Shabad, I started becoming a policeman in my own house. That's where our work is cut out. You know, Ajijat Swer, the Darbar Sahib, the Hukum, when I read this morning, you know, it's so clear. And this was speaking to my allegiance. And Guru Arjan Sahib is saying, Sab upar par Brahm datar, teri tek tera aadhar. That saryan to hote, above all. Because we have somebody is sitting above someone, right? We have this hierarchy in homes, we have hierarchy in organizations, in governments. So we are so used to it. But he's reminding us, he's like, above all of them sits Par Brahm, who is a giver. So just remember, ultimately, the giver is the supreme being who sits above all of the hierarchies you are used to. This is why the word Par Brahm is used, because it's talking about hierarchies. So above all is the supreme being. And then he says, what is his support, right? And Guru Arjan Sahib is saying this, which means I better figure out how to make this my support if I want to play any role, any small role in reviving the Panthic leadership. He says, Teri take, tera aadhar. I rely on you. You are my support. This is what a Panthic leader always did. They knew how to work with the hierarchical systems of the cultures and societies we live in, but they never relied on them and they were never their support.
Thank you so much, Harinder. So we are at the end of our time today. Before we do sign off, though, I want to give you an opportunity for any last comments, any last observations before we say Fateh to the audience.
Well, I think we have a year for us, but let's make it personal, Ram. You and I, we have known each other. I'm putting you on the spot and I'm putting myself on the spot. Let's figure out our yearly project in one project where we can revive a Panthic leadership, where in one organization, it could be any, where we can actually do this. And next year when we talk, we can think about, okay, in this area, we were able to make this small incremental change in reviving Panthic leadership. I think if we all thought like this, whether it is in Sikh Research Institute, whether it is something, in the politics of Canada or Brampton, or whether it is a Panthic affair, which we are dealing with related to Guru Granth Sahib or the crisis of leadership at Akal Takht and other things, it could be in anywhere. I think we need to actually start playing those roles, play them more privately, less publicly. And this is what Sahaje Rachyo Khalsa to me means. Inaugurations should come out when it's completion or near completion, right? We should really be working on those. So why don't you and I team up and actually try to do that in one space, revive a Panthic leader rather than just a leader who might be good otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea and goes back to the theme we've been discussing, which is the model that was laid out by the Guru. The model that's there in our own heritage and our own history is a personal one. And we don't need to look to grand ideas. We don't need to constantly be pointing fingers at other people and their job, but really looking at ourselves and saying, what can we do? What ability do we have? Where is our sphere of influence? And how can we play our part to do that? We're very fortunate. We're all fortunate. We thank you all for joining us. We are recipients of this wonderful, wonderful heritage, which we are celebrating, and we continue to celebrate, not just during Vaisakhi, but year round. Again, our job here at Sikhi is to continue to have these discussions and remind ourselves ways in which we can not only celebrate, but also introspect and retrospect and use the learnings of the past and use the map, the framework that's been laid out for us to continue to build for a stronger future as well. So we really thank you for joining us. Thank you, Harinder Singh. Thank you to the audience. For those who, remind your family and friends, the replay is always available. It's very easy to link and share. through all of our social media channels. You will see, you'll be able to link back to this presentation and to other webinars and presentations that have been organized by Sikhi as well. So thank you all for joining us. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Ramandeep, can I take 30 seconds?
Sure.
I realize we should talk about the Fateh. I just saw a comment. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This indeed is the greetings of the Sikhs, and sometimes I also shorten it to Gur Fateh. But I think it's a great reminder here that the Khalsa is of the Vaheguru. And this is, I interpret this as being Khalsa is a sovereign, and sovereign is of the awesome wisdom, Vaheguru. So look at even in a greeting, that when we are invoking the collective Sikhs, Samu Khalsa, which exemplifies the ideas we've been talking about, it actually only belongs to Vaheguru, which is a noun we have created, which comes through the Guru, which is the wisdom itself. And it's the great, awesome wisdom. So Khalsa belongs to, which means Khalsa is filled with this wisdom, and Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And if we succeed in our endeavors, in this very trying things we try to do, if we ever succeed in any of them, it is not my success or a Sikh success. It is definitely not a Jathebandi success. It actually is a success due to Vaheguru. It's Vaheguru's success.
Yeah. No, that's a great note to end on. And on that, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
I'm just going to close this out. Thank you to Ramandeep Kaur and to Harinder Singh for today's conversation. I think I really appreciated the movement from the theoretical into the practical at the end of our conversation. Thank you everyone for all of your questions, and apologies to those whose questions were not addressed. If they were not, to give a sneak peek of what's coming up at the Sikh Research Institute. This summer is the 20th Civic Leadership Program, and it'll take place on July 24th to August 2nd in British Columbia this summer. So for the first time, this program is fee-free. This is possible because our donors believe in creating future Gurmat-based leaders, transforming the Sikh future. Very on theme with our conversation today. If you're between 18 to 39 and interested in deepening your relationship with Sikhi, consider applying today. The link is right there at sikhi.org/civic. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available within 24 hours. Thank you for joining in. Today's webinar will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.